The evening was colder than usual. The wind carried a sharp chill that made people wrap their coats tighter as they hurried along the streets. Sarah had just finished buying groceries for the week and was walking toward her car, her breath forming little clouds in the air. She moved quickly, eager to get back to the warmth of her home. But then, as she passed by the grocery store entrance, her eyes caught sight of someone sitting quietly on the pavement. A man was sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall. His clothes looked old and worn, and his shoes seemed barely able to hold together. His face carried the tiredness of someone who had been through many winters without shelter. In his hands, he held nothing, no sign, no request for help, just his head slightly bowed as though the world had forgotten him. People passed by him without even a glance. Some turned their heads away quickly, as if pretending not to notice him would make him disappear. Sarah slowed down. Something in her heart didn't let her keep walking. She could see he was shivering, his thin jacket no match for the bitter cold. She stood there for a moment, holding her grocery bags, debating with herself. She had always been taught to be careful, not to talk to strangers, especially ones who looked like they lived on the street. But she had also been raised with the belief that kindness was never wasted. Taking a small breath, she stepped toward him. "Hi," she said softly, her voice carrying both caution and warmth. The man slowly lifted his head. His eyes surprised her. They were not dull or empty. Instead, they carried a quiet strength, though hidden behind fatigue. He gave her a faint nod, as if he didn't expect anyone to notice him, let alone speak to him. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, unsure of what else to say. He gave a small smile, one that looked more like an effort than a real expression of happiness. "I'll be fine," he replied quietly, his voice low and a little rough, perhaps from the cold. Sarah bit her lip. She looked at her grocery bags and then back at him. "Have you eaten?" she asked. The man hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "Not today," he admitted, as though it was just a normal part of his life. Without a second thought, Sarah placed her grocery bags down and reached inside. She pulled out a sandwich she had picked up for herself and a bottle of water. She held them out to him. "Here," she said gently, "please take this." His eyes widened for just a moment before he accepted it carefully, almost like he was afraid someone might take it away from him. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice carried more emotion in those two words than Sarah had expected. She watched as he took slow bites of the sandwich, as though he wanted to make it last. Each bite seemed to warm him, not just his body but something deeper. Sarah stood there, her heart tightening. She couldn't just leave him there in the freezing air, knowing he had nowhere to go. "What's your name?" she asked. The man wiped his hands on his worn-out jacket before answering. "Daniel," he said quietly. "I'm Sarah," she replied with a small smile. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." He gave another small nod, though he didn't look her in the eyes for long. It was clear he wasn't used to people showing him kindness or even treating him like a normal person. Sarah hesitated again. Her house wasn't far, and she had a garage that was empty except for a few old boxes. She thought about the cold, about how the night was only going to get worse. She thought about how dangerous it might be for someone to sleep outside. An idea formed in her mind, but it scared her a little. She didn't know Daniel. She didn't know his story, his past, or what he was capable of. But then she looked at him again, at his tired frame, at the way he ate slowly and gratefully, and her heart made the decision for her. "Daniel," she said carefully, "do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" He looked down at his hands. "No," he admitted, his voice soft. Sarah took a deep breath. "I have a garage," she said slowly. "It's not much, but it's warm enough. If you want, you can stay there for the night." Daniel froze. His eyes lifted to hers, filled with surprise. "Your garage," he asked, as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Yes, she nodded, her tone calm but firm. It's not inside the house, just the garage. But I can put a heater in there, and I have some extra blankets. It will be better than sleeping outside. For a long moment, Daniel didn't say anything. It looked like he was struggling with whether to accept or not. Finally, he shook his head slightly. I don't want to trouble you, he murmured. You wouldn't be troubling me, Sarah replied kindly. It's just one night. I'd feel better knowing you're not out here in the cold. There was silence again, broken only by the sound of cars driving past in the distance. Then Daniel gave a slow nod. If you're sure, he said softly. Sarah smiled faintly. I'm sure. She picked up her grocery bags and motioned for him to follow her. As they walked down the street, she noticed that Daniel walked with quiet steps, almost as if he wanted to avoid leaving a trace. He didn't ask questions, didn't speak much, just followed her with respect. When they reached her small house, Sarah led him to the garage. She opened the door, showing him the space. It wasn't much, just some shelves, boxes, and an old chair, but it was clean and dry. She quickly set down her groceries and brought out some blankets from inside the house. She also placed a small electric heater in the corner, letting the warmth slowly fill the room. Daniel stood by the doorway, looking uncertain. This is too much, he whispered. Sarah shook her head. It's nothing, really. I just don't want you to be cold tonight. He looked around the garage, then back at her. His eyes seemed to soften, and for the first time since she had met him, he almost looked at peace. Thank you, he said again, but this time the words carried more weight. She gave him a gentle smile. Get some rest, she told him. Good night. As Sarah went inside her house, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Part of her worried if she had done the right thing, letting a stranger sleep on her property. But a stronger part of her heart felt that she had made the only choice she could. She couldn't ignore someone in need. That night, as the wind howled outside and the cold deepened, Sarah lay in her warm bed thinking about Daniel. She wondered who he really was, what his story might be, and how someone could end up with nothing in a world so full of people. She didn't know that this one act of kindness was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Meanwhile, in the garage, Daniel lay on the makeshift bed Sarah had prepared. The warmth of the heater wrapped around him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt safe. He stared at the ceiling, his mind full of thoughts he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Gratitude, hope, and something else, a reminder that there were still people in the world who cared. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes, holding on to that thought as sleep finally found him. The morning sunlight slipped through the small window of the garage, casting soft golden lines across the floor. Daniel stirred slowly, blinking as the warmth of the light touched his face. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The steady hum of the small heater, the blanket tucked over him, and the quiet safety of the space felt like a dream. Then he remembered Sarah, the woman who had offered him kindness without asking for anything in return. He sat up and looked around the garage. It was simple, filled with boxes of old books, some gardening tools, and a bicycle leaning against the wall. To him, though, it felt like a palace compared to the cold pavement where he had spent so many nights. His body felt a little stronger, his chest lighter. It amazed him how something as small as a blanket and four walls could feel like a gift of immeasurable worth. Daniel carefully folded the blanket and placed it neatly on the chair. He didn't want to leave things messy. He stood quietly by the door, debating whether to knock and thank Sarah or slip away quietly without disturbing her. Part of him felt unworthy of her generosity. People rarely showed him such kindness, and he didn't want to overstay his welcome. Before he could decide, the door opened. Sarah stood there holding a mug of steaming coffee. She looked surprised but smiled when she saw him awake. Good morning, she said warmly. Daniel gave a small nod. Good morning. I I should go now. Thank you for letting me stay. Sarah shook her head. No rush. I brought you some coffee. It's cold outside, and you might need it. She handed him the mug, and Daniel accepted it carefully, as if it were something fragile. He took a sip, and the warmth spread through his body. It wasn't just the coffee, it was the feeling that someone cared. He glanced at her, wanting to say more but not knowing how to express what he felt. You don't have to thank me, Sarah said softly, as if reading his thoughts. It was just one night. Anyone would have done the same. Daniel looked down at the floor. No, he whispered. Not everyone. Most people don't even look at me. Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to ask about his life, about what had led him to the streets, but she didn't want to pry. She decided to keep it simple. Well, you're welcome here. I mean, not in the house, she added quickly, not wanting him to misunderstand, but if you ever need a place to warm up, the garage is here. Daniel gave her a small smile. It was faint, but it reached his eyes for a moment. That's very kind. Sarah nodded, then stepped back. I should get ready for work. Will you be okay? Yes, he replied quietly. I'll be fine. Thank you again. She left him there with the coffee, and a short while later, Daniel slipped away. He didn't want to take more than she had offered. As he walked down the street, he carried the warmth of her kindness with him, and though the wind bit at his face, he felt something inside that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, Sarah thought about Daniel again. She wondered where he was sleeping, whether he had food, whether he was safe. She scolded herself for worrying too much, but the thought of him alone in the cold stayed in her mind. She told herself that she had done what she could, yet deep down, she wished she could do more. Days passed, and Sarah returned to her routine. Work, groceries, small chores, the usual rhythm of her life. But Daniel's face kept returning to her thoughts. She even found herself glancing near the grocery store whenever she passed by, half expecting to see him sitting there again. Sometimes he was there, sometimes not. When she saw him, she wanted to stop, but something inside told her not to overwhelm him. She wanted him to know she respected his space. One afternoon, as she was carrying bags back to her car, she noticed him again, sitting quietly in the same spot. This time, she walked up to him without hesitation. Hi, Daniel, she greeted. He looked up, startled, then relaxed when he recognized her. Hello, he said softly. She placed one of her grocery bags on the ground and pulled out some fruit. Here, she said, handing it to him. He accepted it, his eyes softening. You don't have to keep doing this, he said gently. I know, she replied. But I want to. For the first time, Daniel chuckled, a sound so rare it almost surprised him. You're stubborn, he said with a hint of humor. Sarah smiled. That's what my friends say too. They shared a small laugh, and in that brief moment, the wall of silence around Daniel began to crack. He told her a little about himself, just small pieces, nothing too deep. He said he used to travel a lot, that he once had a different kind of life, though he didn't explain how it had changed. Sarah listened without pressing him for more. She sensed that he wasn't ready to open up completely. As days turned into weeks, their encounters became a quiet routine. Sarah would sometimes bring him food, and Daniel would always accept with a quiet thank you. He never asked for more, never begged, never complained. There was a dignity about him that stood out, even in his worn clothes and tired face. One evening, as she was leaving the grocery store, the wind was fierce again, colder than before. She saw Daniel sitting there, shivering. Without thinking twice, she said, "Daniel, come back to the garage tonight. It's going to be too cold." He hesitated, just as he had the first time, but then nodded slowly. That night, she set up the garage again with blankets and the small heater. He stayed silently, grateful but reserved. What Sarah didn't know was that every time she offered him kindness, Daniel's heart fought with itself. He was not what he seemed, not entirely. Behind his silence was a story he had hidden from the world, a story that explained why he had chosen this life, why he sometimes disappeared, and why he never asked for anything. Inside, he knew he couldn't stay invisible forever. One day, the truth would have to come out. But for now, he let Sarah believe what she saw: a homeless man in need of help. And for the first time in years, he let himself feel the comfort of friendship, even if it was fragile and new. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she felt a strange calmness. She didn't know why she cared so much about Daniel, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about him. Something more than met the eye. And she had no idea that the man sleeping in her garage was carrying a secret that would soon change her life forever. The week passed, and Daniel disappeared once again. Sarah noticed his absence immediately. She had grown used to seeing him near the grocery store, or at least knowing he might stop by the garage when the nights grew colder. But this time, he was nowhere to be found. At first, she thought maybe he had found another place to stay or perhaps traveled somewhere else. But after a few days, she began to worry. She didn't know why she cared so much about a man she barely knew, yet the thought of him struggling alone in the cold troubled her deeply. She found herself scanning the streets when she drove through town, hoping to catch even a glimpse of him. Then, almost a week later, there was a knock at her door. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the entrance. When she opened the door, she froze in surprise. Daniel was standing there, but he didn't look the same. His face was clean-shaven, his hair trimmed neatly, and instead of worn-out clothes, he wore a simple but smart jacket. His shoes were polished, and his posture seemed taller, more confident. For a moment, Sarah thought she was looking at a completely different man. "Daniel?" she asked in disbelief. He gave her a gentle smile. "Hello, Sarah." Her eyes widened as she stepped aside. "Please, come in." He walked in quietly, his movements calm, as though he had expected this reaction. Sarah shut the door behind him and turned to face him again. "I almost didn't recognize you," she admitted. "You look different." "I suppose I do," Daniel said softly. "I thought it was time you saw me as I really am." Sarah frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He looked around the small but cozy living room, his eyes softening as if he appreciated the simplicity. Then he turned back to her. "The night you let me stay in your garage, I was more than grateful. You gave me warmth when I had none, and you treated me like a human being when many others walked past as if I were invisible. I need to tell you the truth, Sarah. I haven't been fully honest with you." Sarah felt her heart quicken. She didn't know what he was about to reveal, but the seriousness in his tone made her sit down on the couch. Daniel remained standing for a moment before slowly lowering himself into the chair across from her. "I wasn't always on the streets," he began. "Years ago, I had a life most people would envy. A good business, a large home, more money than I could spend. But along the way, I lost something far more important: peace. Life took turns I never expected, and I made mistakes. Personal tragedy followed, and for a long time, I lost myself completely. I walked away from everything." Sarah listened carefully, her eyes fixed on him. His words carried weight, as if they came from deep scars. "I didn't end up homeless because I had no resources," Daniel continued. "I chose to leave it all behind. I needed to see the world differently. I needed to know what it felt like to have nothing, to rely only on the kindness or unkindness of strangers. It's strange, isn't it? A man with millions living like a beggar. But I wanted to strip away everything false in my life. I wanted to see who people truly are when they have nothing to gain from you. Sarah sat in silence, trying to process his words. The man she had thought of as a struggling, broken soul was, in truth, a wealthy man who had hidden his identity. "So, you're not homeless?" she asked carefully. Daniel shook his head. "Not in the way you think. I still have my fortune. I still have access to everything I once had. But I live this way because it reminds me of what really matters. I have been testing the world, in a sense. And until I met you, I rarely found what I was searching for." Sarah's brows furrowed slightly. "What were you searching for?" His eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "Kindness. True kindness. Without expectation, without judgment. That night, when you offered me your garage, you didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You simply cared. Do you know how rare that is, Sarah?" Her throat felt tight. She didn't know what to say. She thought back to that night, how natural it had felt to help him, how she hadn't even questioned her decision for long. To her, it was nothing extraordinary, just the right thing to do. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Why tell me this now?" Daniel looked down for a moment, then back at her. "Because you deserve to know. And because I want to thank you properly. You reminded me of something I had lost, the belief that goodness still exists in people. You have no idea how much that one act changed me." Sarah shook her head slightly. "But I didn't do anything. I just gave you a place to sleep." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the simplest actions hold the greatest meaning. You may see it as small, but to me, it was everything." She sat back, still stunned. The idea that the man she had pitied, the man she had worried about, was actually a millionaire was almost too much to believe. But looking at him now, so composed and sincere, she knew he was telling the truth. "Why come back here?" she asked softly. "Because I want to help you," Daniel replied firmly. "You've given me something I can't put a price on. And I want to give something back. Tell me, Sarah, what do you dream of? What do you want most in life?" She blinked, caught off guard. I I don't know. I haven't really thought about it." Daniel tilted his head. "There must be something. A dream, a passion, something you've always wished you could do if only circumstances allowed." Sarah hesitated, then laughed softly. "It sounds silly." "Tell me anyway," Daniel encouraged. She sighed, looking down at her hands. "I've always wanted to open a community center. A place for families who are struggling, for children who need a safe space. I've seen too many kids in this town with nowhere to go after school, nowhere that makes them feel cared for. I wanted to create something like that, but dreams like those need money. And I don't have enough." Daniel's eyes lit up. "That's not silly at all. That's beautiful. And it's exactly the kind of dream worth supporting." Sarah looked at him, startled. "Daniel, no. I didn't tell you this for money. I don't expect anything from you." "I know," he said gently. "That's what makes it real. But I want to help you, Sarah. You gave me a chance to feel human again. Let me give you a chance to make your dream real." Her heart pounded. She wasn't used to anyone offering her such things. She had always relied on herself, always worked hard to manage on her own. Accepting help, especially on such a scale, felt overwhelming. "I can't," she began, but Daniel raised a hand gently. "Don't answer now. Think about it. All I ask is that you consider it. Because sometimes, Sarah, dreams aren't meant to stay locked inside. Sometimes they're meant to be lived." The room fell quiet. Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, gratitude, disbelief, and a small spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. The man she had once thought of as a poor stranger was far more than he seemed. And somehow, their lives had become tied together by a single night of kindness. The days after Daniel's visit felt different for Sarah. Her mind was restless, replaying his words again and again. She still couldn't believe it. The man she had welcomed into her garage, the man she thought was homeless and forgotten, was in fact a millionaire who had chosen to hide his wealth. She thought about his confession at night when she lay in bed, and in the mornings when she made her coffee. It was as if his presence had left a mark on her thoughts. Part of her still doubted it, wondering if maybe he had made it up, though his neat appearance and calm confidence told another story. But more than that, there was something in his eyes, something steady and sincere, that convinced her he wasn't lying. What troubled her most was his offer. He wanted to help her with her dream, the one she had only spoken about once or twice to friends who had dismissed it as too ambitious. A community center. How could someone like her make that real? She had never had enough money, never had the right connections. It was only ever a dream she carried quietly, one she thought would fade with time. And now, Daniel had brought it to the surface again. A week passed before she saw him again. This time, she spotted him walking toward her house just as the sun was setting. He was dressed simply, not in anything too fancy, but still far from the ragged clothes she first saw him in. He carried a calmness with him, the kind of presence that made Sarah nervous but also curious. She invited him in without hesitation. They sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. For a while, they didn't speak much. Sarah busied herself pouring tea into cups, trying to find the right words. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Have you thought about what I said?" Sarah let out a soft laugh. "Every day since you left. I don't think I've ever thought about anything so much." "And?" he asked, his voice patient. "And I don't know," she admitted. "It feels too big, too impossible. I wouldn't even know where to start." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "That's the thing about dreams. They always feel too big at first. But every great thing starts small: one idea, one step, one act of courage. You already have the vision. All you need is a little push to bring it to life." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I'm just an ordinary person. I work, I pay bills, I get by. What if I fail?" Daniel's eyes softened. "Failure isn't the end, Sarah. It's just part of the journey. You gave me kindness when I had nothing to give you in return. Let me do the same for you. Let me give you the chance to see what happens when your dream gets a little help." His words touched something deep inside her. She wanted to believe him, but fear clung to her heart. Yet as she looked at him, she realized he wasn't pressuring her. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply offering, with no strings attached. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "That's all I ask," Daniel replied with a small smile. Over the next several weeks, their conversations continued. Sometimes he would stop by her house, other times she would see him walking in town. They spoke more about the community center, about what it could look like, who it could serve, and what kind of programs could be offered. Sarah found herself getting excited as she described her ideas: after-school classes for children, counseling for struggling families, a food pantry for those in need. She spoke with passion, her eyes lighting up as she shared each thought. Daniel listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. He never dismissed her ideas, never made her feel small. Instead, he encouraged her, reminding her that every dream begins with someone brave enough to believe in it. One evening, after a long discussion, Daniel pulled out a folder from his bag. He placed it on the table in front of her. "This is for you," he said. Sarah frowned, curious, and opened the folder. Inside were documents, plans, budget outlines, potential building sites. She stared at them in shock. "You did all this?" "I had some people put it together," Daniel explained. "I wanted to show you that it's possible. You don't have to imagine it anymore. It can be real." Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. It was overwhelming, but also thrilling. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "Why are you doing this for me?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. When you helped me, you didn't see a homeless man or a millionaire. You just saw a person who needed kindness. That kind of heart deserves a chance to shine. And because this isn't just for you, Sarah, it's for everyone this center will help. It's for the children, the families, the people who will walk through those doors one day." Tears filled her eyes. She quickly blinked them away, not wanting to cry in front of him, but the emotion was too strong. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied softly. "Just promise me you'll believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." That night, after Daniel left, Sarah sat at the kitchen table long after the tea had gone cold. She looked through the folder again and again, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. For the first time in years, her dream didn't feel like a distant thought. It felt like something within reach. The next morning, she woke with a new kind of energy. She walked through town, looking at buildings and spaces with fresh eyes, imagining what could be transformed into a community center. She spoke to a few friends about the idea, testing the waters, and to her surprise, many of them responded with support and encouragement. It was as if the idea itself carried a light that others wanted to be part of. As the weeks went on, Sarah began to believe. Daniel continued to guide her quietly, never forcing but always supporting. He introduced her to people who could help with planning, with fundraising, with designing programs. He made it clear that this was her project, her vision, but he would be there in the background, ready to provide whatever resources she needed. Slowly, piece by piece, the dream began to take shape. Through it all, Sarah found herself growing closer to Daniel. She no longer saw him as just the mysterious man she once invited into her garage. She saw him as a friend, someone who understood her heart in a way few people did. Their bond deepened not through grand gestures, but through quiet conversations, shared hopes, and the simple belief in each other. And while Sarah focused on building the future, Daniel carried a quiet joy inside him. For years, he had searched for proof that kindness still existed in the world. In Sarah, he had found it. And now, he was determined to make sure her kindness echoed far beyond one night in a garage. Neither of them knew it yet, but the small seed planted on that cold evening was about to grow into something far greater than either of them had ever imagined. Months passed, and what once seemed like a dream too far away was now slowly becoming real. Sarah could hardly believe how much had changed in her life. The old building at the edge of town, which had been empty for years, was now alive with workers repairing walls, painting rooms, and installing shelves. Every day she stopped by to see the progress, and every day her heart filled with both excitement and disbelief. Daniel stayed close, though always in the background. He never pushed himself into the center of attention. Instead, he guided quietly, making introductions to the right people, arranging meetings with those who could help, and ensuring that everything moved forward smoothly. He made sure Sarah remained the face and heart of the project. He wanted the community to see it as her vision, her creation. One afternoon, as Sarah stood in the newly painted hall, she ran her hand across the fresh wall and smiled. She remembered when this very room had been dark and filled with dust. Now it was bright, full of promise. Children's voices would soon echo in this space, and families would gather here for support and comfort. The thought alone brought tears to her eyes. Daniel walked in quietly and stood beside her. "It's coming together," he said softly. Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining. I still can't believe this is happening. Every time I walk in here, I feel like I'm dreaming. It's no dream, Daniel replied with a small smile. It's your hard work. You did this. She shook her head. No, Daniel. We did this. Without you, none of it would have been possible. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Without your kindness that first night, I wouldn't be here at all. So, really, it began with you. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. For Sarah, it was overwhelming to realize how far one small act of compassion had carried her. For Daniel, it was humbling to see how one woman's simple kindness had restored his belief in people and led to something so meaningful. When the community center finally opened, the whole town came to see it. Bright balloons decorated the entrance, and children ran excitedly through the hallways, peeking into every room. Parents looked relieved, hopeful, and grateful as they listened to Sarah explain what the center would offer: tutoring for children, workshops for parents, a pantry for families in need, and safe spaces for anyone looking for help. Sarah stood in front of the crowd, nervous at first but soon finding her voice. She thanked everyone for their support and explained how the idea had started. She didn't mention Daniel's wealth or his hidden life, but she did speak about kindness. Sometimes, she said, her voice steady, a single act of kindness can change more than one life. It can create a chain of good that spreads further than we ever imagine. This center is proof of that. The crowd clapped, and Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She glanced at Daniel, who stood quietly at the back of the room, watching with a calm smile. He didn't want recognition, didn't want applause. It was enough for him to see Sarah's dream alive and the community filled with hope. Over the next weeks, the center became a place of warmth and life. Children came after school, their laughter filling the rooms. Volunteers helped with tutoring and activities. Families visited the pantry, leaving with bags of food and hearts a little lighter. Slowly, the community began to change. People who once felt alone now had a place where they belonged. Sarah worked tirelessly, but she never complained. Every tired evening she returned home with a smile because she knew the effort was worth it. And through it all, Daniel visited often, always quietly. Sometimes he helped with small tasks, like arranging books or setting up chairs. Other times, he simply sat and watched the joy unfold. One evening, after a long day at the center, Sarah and Daniel sat together on a bench outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. Sarah leaned back, breathing deeply. I never thought my life would turn out like this, she admitted. I thought my dream would stay locked in my heart forever. But now, here it is, real and alive. And it's because of you. Daniel shook his head. It's because of you, Sarah. You believed. You were brave enough to take the first step. She turned to him, her eyes soft. You know, the night I let you sleep in the garage, I didn't think it would lead to all this. I just wanted to help. I never imagined it would change my life. Daniel's voice grew quiet, almost thoughtful. That's the beauty of kindness. We never know how far it will go. Sometimes, it grows into something bigger than we can ever imagine. Sarah smiled, her heart warm. She realized that Daniel had not only given her the chance to create her dream but had also become a dear friend, someone she deeply respected and cared for. Their bond was unique, built on trust, honesty, and compassion. As the months turned into a year, the center thrived. More people from the community came forward to help, donating time, resources, and support. The small seed had grown into a tree that offered shelter to many. And through it all, Sarah never forgot how it started with a stranger sitting in the cold and a choice to show kindness. Daniel remained a quiet benefactor, never seeking recognition. He continued to live simply, blending into the background. Few people knew his true story, and he preferred it that way. To him, the reward was not in being known but in seeing lives changed. One evening, as Sarah locked up the center after a busy day, she looked around at the bright, welcoming rooms and felt a deep sense of peace. She thought about the children who laughed there, the families who found hope, and the friendships that had grown within those walls. She knew none of it would have been possible if she had ignored Daniel that night. Her heart whispered a truth she now fully believed: kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back, often in ways we least expect. As she stepped outside, she saw Daniel waiting, his familiar quiet smile greeting her. Together, they walked down the street, side by side. No words were needed. They both knew that what had begun as one small act had grown into something that touched not only their lives but the lives of countless others. And so, the story that began with a cold night and a warm garage ended with a community transformed, a dream fulfilled, and two people forever changed by the power of simple kindness.